Hello, my name is Katie Kitchen, and for my capstone project, I focused on how school environments shape the social development of deaf and hard of hearing students. Okay, so the reason I chose this question was because I have worked at both a provincial school for the deaf, where we used ASL to communicate, and students were among deaf peers who signed, and then as well as deaf staff. So they were immersed in deaf culture on a daily basis. Versus now, I'm currently working as a deaf itinerant teacher in a mainstream school setting, where typically a lot of the students are the only deaf student either in their classroom or even in their school. So the reason I chose this question was because I was really curious about how these various settings may affect the social outcome of our students, and how it might play on their peer relationships and their relationships with teachers and the support staff. So my research question is, how do mainstream classrooms and provincial schools for the deaf in their impact on students' social development, peer relationships, and a sense of belonging for deaf and hard of hearing learners? So the methodology was, I anonymously surveyed 12 deaf and hard of hearing students who attend a mainstream school. So I asked them 10 different questions on like a Google survey. Um, and if, of course, students like needed support, I would help, but most of it was anonymous and they did it on their own. Um, And then I also surveyed 10 students who attend a provincial school for the deaf. So they were asked very similar questions regarding their social experience at a school for the deaf. These questions touched on topics such as peer relationships, communication breakdowns, support from their teachers and peers, as well as knowledge and understanding of deaf culture. So the participants' age ranged from grade 4 to grade 10. And as I said earlier, the survey was completed anonymously to ensure that students felt safe enough to express how they truly feel. I didn't want myself or other teachers who administered it to kind of affect what they felt. So the results for students in a mainstream school. It's kind of hard to see, but this was an example of one of the questions here. Do you feel comfortable advocating for yourself and your hearing needs um, in social situations at school? So again, that could be in the classroom if a student missed something that the teacher or a peer might have said. Um, it could be just kind of basic self advocacy skills. So blue was yes, I feel comfortable. Red was, I believe, sometimes. So sorry, red is mostly. So I mostly feel that I can advocate for myself, but sometimes I'm unsure. Um, Yellow here is sometimes, but I'm not always sure what to do. Green is rarely. Um, and then purple is no. So as you can see, a lot of deaf or hard of hearing students who are in a mainstream school feel that they only are sometimes comfortable advocating, with 20% saying no, they don't feel comfortable advocating for themselves, and another 20% saying most of the time they do, which is kind of shocking that there are no students who say, yes, I feel fully comfortable advocating for my hearing needs. Um, so deaf and hard of hearing students are often the only learners with hearing loss in their class or school. This creates challenges as they navigate social environments shaped primarily by hearing peers. These circumstances influence students' sense of belonging, the quality of their friendships, and their ability to self advocate. Deaf and hard of hearing students' experience reflect a mix of opportunities for connection and barriers, which can affect the overall social participation and feelings of inclusion. So, throughout this survey, many students expressed a strong desire to belong socially. However, due to communication barriers, fast paced group environments, and a limited knowledge of understanding from staff and peers, made full participation difficult. So again, a lot of their teachers really don't understand hearing loss. They don't understand what that looks like, how that can affect a student's learning in different environments. So as a result of this, students often reported feeling included on a surface level, yet disconnected during deeper social interactions, whether that's like through gym or outside at recess. Most students indicated that they were generally perceived the same as their hearing peers, which is great. But on the other hand, some described feeling left out or overlooked in social situations. Although students characterized their friendship with hearing peers as mostly positive, the relationships required additional effort from the deaf and hard of hearing student, which included monitoring conversations, ensuring that they were repairing communication breakdowns when those occur, and adapting to environments that didn't consistently support their communication needs. Again, lots of background noise. If you're outside playing at recess and a student's far away and they're missing a lot of that communication, it always fell on, not always, but a lot of the time it falls on the student who is deaf. So self advocacy played a significant role in the student's social experience, yet their confidence and skills varied widely. Only a few students reported feeling comfortable in expressing their communication needs to their teachers and peers, such as asking them to repeat questions, asking for visual supports or quieter environments. Or the consistent use of hearing assistive technology, so whether it's their FM system, ensuring that their speakers are on in the classroom. So other students hesitated to speak up due to concerns about being perceived as different or drawing unwanted attention to their hearing loss. A lot of the students that I work with often feel that they don't want to speak up because they're embarrassed and then they don't want the extra attention because they don't want to have to explain themselves. So, in group settings, including recess, lunch, and then collaborative classroom activities like small group activities, these were identified as the most challenging environments for our students. In these environments, students felt as though the conversations were rapid, overlapping, and they were difficult to follow, especially following subtle social cues. This made it challenging for the students to follow interactions and advocate for their needs effectively. Over half of the students in the survey reported that they felt as though their teachers didn't understand their communication needs or how to fully support deaf and hard of hearing learners. Again, this is quite eye opening. If students don't feel as though that the teacher understands them or knows how to support them, they clearly aren't getting the support that they need in class to learn at their full potential. So, an overwhelming majority of deaf and hard of hearing students in a mainstream school had little to no knowledge regarding deaf culture. So, a third of the respondents indicated that they would like to know more but are unsure of where to start. Um, Again, that one was quite shocking, asking the students if they had any experience in deaf culture. Most came back saying they didn't know what deaf culture was and that they really didn't have any experience with it. Um, So again, as an itinerant role, it's important for us to ensure that our students are gaining access to that and learning about other deaf people and about deaf culture. So overall, the mainstream environment can offer meaningful social opportunities, but deaf and hard of hearing students, their sense of belonging and the quality of their peer relationships depend heavily on communication access, peer awareness, and then the student's own self-advocacy skills. So this was another example of one of the questions. It says, being one of the only deaf students in the classroom or school, do you feel a sense of belonging? So at 50%, the student says, yes, I feel a strong sense of belonging and connection. Um, there's no one that said mostly. I feel included, even though I'm sometimes aware of my needs. And then at 25%, it says sometimes I feel like I belong in certain areas, but not in others. 12.5% says they rarely feel a sense of belonging or a part of the group. And then 12.5% say that they know they don't feel a sense of belonging at all in school, which is really quite sad. We don't ever want, obviously, any student to feel that way about themselves. So then this is the results for the students at the Provincial School for the Deaf who communicate using sign language. So again, an example of one of the questions is up here. Do you feel comfortable advocating for yourself in social areas at school and in the classroom. And so here, I believe it's 50%. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see. Most of the students, 50% of students said that they mostly feel comfortable advocating for their needs and understanding their communication needs. And then here, I think it's 15% say yes, they always feel comfortable advocating for their needs. And then as I think it's 33% that they sometimes, um, it depends on the people or their peers. So, at the provincial school for the staff, students generally perceive their teachers as making substantial efforts to meet their needs, though several students noted that the important supports are occasionally overlooked. Whereas a small group of students reported that their teachers consistently understood and responded to their individual needs. Um, Again, it's important that our deaf and hard of hearing students feel supported. So at a deaf school, it seems as though they feel more supported from their teachers than at a mainstream school. So again, it says students' experience of inclusion within the school communities were varied. Many students indicated a strong sense of belonging or described feeling connected in certain contexts, depending on the specific spaces and their peer groups involved. So a smaller group reported mostly feeling included, while one student indicated rarely experiencing a sense of inclusion among peers. Um, Half of the students expressed ambivalence regarding their peer relationships. These students reported enjoying time with peers but wished for a greater number of classmates who shared similar interests. Um, so I did notice that, like working at the provincial school for the deaf, a lot of time there was a group of girls there, and maybe there's only 7 high school girls, and their interests are very widely. So I could understand how they're saying that they wish that they had more students who enjoyed similar interests as them. So, approximately one third of the students described their friendships and the sense of community in highly positive terms, while a small number characterized their peer relationships as mostly positive. Across responses, a majority of students expressed a desire for more peers with shared interest. Some students felt that they already had sufficient peers with similar interests, whereas others reported that their current friends didn't share their interests at all. Students' broader sense of belonging within the school was evenly distributed. One third reported a strong sense of belonging, a third reported mostly feeling that they belonged, and then a third indicated that they felt connected only in certain situations. Half of the students reported feeling connecting to deaf culture, while one third mostly felt connected. A smaller group indicated limited connection to deaf culture. When asked about learning more, one quarter expressed a desire to deepen their knowledge, half were curious but uncertain how to begin, and a quarter felt that they were knowledgeable but still interested in expanding their understanding. Half of the students described making friends as mostly easy, whereas a smaller group reported that forming friendships was sometimes challenging or predominantly challenging. Students were evenly divided in their perceptions of whether peers understood their communication needs. Half felt their needs were met, while the other half felt that their needs were mostly met with some expectations. When communication breakdowns occurred in ASL, so that might be difficulties with non manual markers, maybe finger spelling, lighting, distance, or a signing style difference, most students reported that their peers responded supportively and attempted to assist, even when unsure how to do so effectively. And then it says half of the students reported feeling mostly comfortable advocating for their needs with some situational limitations. One third described their comfort with self advocacy as dependent on the situation, and a small number reported consistently feeling comfortable advocating for themselves. Okay, and so on the next page here, so the data analysis and key findings. Students' sense of belonging was stronger and more stable in the school for the deaf, where communication access and shared cultural experiences were more readily available. In contrast, belonging in the mainstream setting was conditional and often dependent on many factors, which were shaped by communication challenges and absence of peers with similar lived experiences. In both settings, students desired peers with shared interest, but the nature of the effort required differed significantly. In the School for the Deaf, the challenges were related to interest alignment, whereas in the mainstream school, the challenges were rooted in communication access, social navigation, making friendships, which were more labor intensive for the deaf and hard of hearing students. Communication access was significantly stronger in the School for the Deaf, where peers shared a common language, communication norms, and then in the mainstream school, communication challenges were persistent and systemic, shaping nearly every aspect of students' social participation. Teacher understanding was higher and more consistent in the School for the Deaf. In the mainstream settings, gaps in teacher knowledge and training created large barriers to both academic and social participation, and reinforcing students' need to self advocate. So, cultural identity development was supported and readily available in the School for the Deaf, but almost non existent in the mainstream school environment. This gap has implications for identity formation and belonging and self advocacy. The self advocacy demands were higher in mainstream school, but students felt less confident using these skills. In the School for the Deaf, self advocacy was more situational and less tied to basic communication access. So, across both of these settings, the deaf and hard of hearing students sought meaningful friendships, shared interest, and supportive adults, but the conditions that made the experience possible differed significantly. In the School for the Deaf, communication access, shared language, and cultural alignment created a foundation for stronger belonging and more equitable peer relationships. Whereas in the mainstream school, the same factors were inconsistent, resulting in more surface level inclusion, greater social effort, and a heightened reliance on self advocacy for our deaf and hard of hearing students. These findings indicate that the communication access, peer awareness, and opportunities for cultural connection are the primary drivers for deaf and hard of hearing students and their social participation. These these findings indicate that communication access, peer awareness, and opportunities for cultural connection are the primary drivers for deaf and hard of hearing students' social participation. These supports are more consistently available in deaf centered environments than in a mainstream school setting. Again, these are some examples of questions from the survey. So the first one here are responses from students at a provincial school for the deaf. So the question is, do you feel that your peers understand your communication needs, such as how you prefer to communicate, what helps you follow conversation, or what makes interactions easier for you? So 50% responded saying, yes, my peers understand my communication needs really well, with the other 50% saying mostly. They understand most of the time with some expectations some few exceptions. And then down here is the response from the deaf students attending a mainstream school. So it says, do you feel that your peers understand your communication needs? So hearing aids, cochlear implants, FM systems. So 11% here said, yes, they understand very well and know how to support me. 33% said mostly. They try to understand somewhat of what they need. 22% reported that sometimes a few peers understand, but many are unsure. 22% responded, not really. Most peers don't understand their communication needs. And then 11% said, it's not applicable. All right. And then lastly, here's the action plan. So, what can we do to better support our students? So the survey findings indicate that both the Provincial School for the Deaf and the mainstream school must begin by addressing systemic gaps, including insufficient teacher training, hiring practices that do not prioritize ASL proficiency, language deprivation, and limited understanding of students' diverse communication needs. The overarching goal is enhancing deaf and hard of hearing students' sense of belonging, communication access, peer relationships, and cultural identity development across all school environments. So, communication access emerged as the most significant factor shaping students' social experiences, influencing their sense of belonging, peer connections, and reliance on self advocacy. The survey findings revealed that teachers in the mainstream setting often wanted to support their students but lacked the training to fully understand the lived experience of navigating noisy, fast paced environments as a deaf learner. Whereas students at the School for the Deaf encountered staff who weren't fluent in ASL and demonstrated a limited knowledge of deaf culture, creating parallel barriers to access. Teacher understanding of deaf and hard of hearing communication needs were more consistent in the School for the Deaf, but vary widely in the mainstream context. So, creating a need which should require both professional learnings, clear school wide guidelines supporting deaf and hard of hearing learners, and strengthen collaboration with itinerant teachers of the deaf to ensure that support is consistent and evidence based. While self advocacy is an essential skill, mainstream environments place a disproportionate burden on students to secure communication access. Deaf itinerant teachers must prioritize explicit instruction in self advocacy strategies, regular staff check ins with the students, and proactive communication support that reduce the need for students to repeatedly advocate for themselves. So, developing individualized communication profiles and sharing them with all staff to ensure that students' needs are understood, anticipated, and supported across contexts. To ensure equitable communication access, schools must implement practices such as visual communication norms, consistent use of hearing assistive technology and interpreters, and structured supports for group work to reduce rapid overlapping conversations. Schools need to follow a universal design for communication principles across classrooms and minimize reliance on students' advocacy and individual teacher expertise. Students in both settings emphasize the importance of meaningful peer relationships, yet mainstream students faced more frequent barriers due to limited peer awareness and fast paced social interactions. Mainstream schools should include deaf awareness education for all students, structured peer to peer programs that foster relationship building, and intentional design of social spaces that support visual access and inclusive participation. Teaching peers how to respond to communication breakdowns